summer I hurt my back. Backpacking stuff.
Right. Well, I say we had a really good start to the year, anyways.
Kind of same.
Yeah, and I have it actually. It's streaming right now. Hang out. So it's recording it directly to YouTube right now. But it's only getting the images. For some reason, it doesn't transfer the videos. And but it'll still record the whole presentation.
Oh, it was the St. Mary's River. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, St. Mary's River.
Yeah.
And Lionel and Simon was inside.
I just put a post on YouTube, on Facebook, linked to YouTube, but I couldn't figure out how to go live on Facebook.
Yeah. That's hard after a while. I think that's good. You know, something volunteering, so you gotta stop making fun. Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Oh, yeah. Oh no, that sucks. Yeah, we cuddled in girls' court as well with the table land. Cuddled in
I stayed like
oh, the long range bird? Yeah. Yeah, you make up the long range bird. I heard
Over here, in this general area. What's that?
Yeah. That's in where the ferry parks, I think, right? Yeah. That's ridiculous. Yeah, no, it wasn't that tour that we did. It was in the table land. So it was like an hour time there. Still in the park. It was on the western side of the Yeah. It's just not community thing, so I keep just throwing back that stuff. Quiet. I did it about 12 years ago, and I did it maybe 3 years ago. Makes sense. Yeah, big difference. Cool trip, yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's really cool. Okay. Yeah, works really well. Yeah, you can get lost forever. Back out, like it's lost again. Oh, you are awesome. Where are folks? Jeez, that's nice. Do you live in the peninsula and everything? Yeah, well, and that was the summer. Yeah, we did that. We did another just like weekend package up in the Wild Islands. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Oh yeah. It was busy. We went on a long weekend and there were a lot of cars back there, so we were a little bit nervous about how many insects we'll have. Because it's, you know, it's pretty exposed out there. There's a guidebook that I think he wrote a guidebook that had like 6 years ago now. Lists some of the campsites. He's a lot of I contacted him and he gave me his map, which I printed off and laminated. No way, really.
Hey everybody. Hey Phil. Oh, we're going. Good. We're gonna do this.
You got a crowd tonight.
Yeah, look at this. You're gonna do a head count for me?
Serious? No, you can do it.
It's pretty good. 25, 26. Hi, Liam. How do you do? I'm done with you. All right, well, I guess it's time to go. Tried to make some kind of crazy technology.
Hopefully you have pictures of plants.
Pictures of plants?
Of course.
Yeah, there's a couple pictures of plants. Yeah. Sure, Phil. I'm not much of a botanist.
That's your last.
Okay. All right. Hey, everybody.
Hi, Dave.
Welcome to a night of adventure. My name is Dave Green. I will be hosting you tonight, as well as all the other nights. And you are all at Night of Adventure 6.1B, because I've already done this presentation once. It happened last week in Wolfville. So a couple of housekeeping things here quick. If you need to use the bathroom, it is through those doors over there to the left. They are gender neutral, so just go to one of them. Just remember to wash your hands. Other than that, I don't know. This is my first time in this space, so Common Good Solution has been very kind. to open it up to us. This is Josh here. He's also our host for the night. Say hi, Josh.
So yeah, bathrooms down that hall.
Emergency exit?
Emergency exit is right here. And then, yeah. If you need me, I'll be around somewhere. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the night and enjoy our space.
Thank you very much. Okay, so everybody see the screen? Everybody's happy with that? Good. All right. I have a lot of things to say tonight, so I'm just going to launch right into it. So Night of Adventure was created 6 years ago now in Wolfville because I had a friend of mine encourage me to create a platform for passionate people to share their stories with others. The whole idea is to promote big adventures and expeditions that are completed through human-powered transportation. So anything without a motor. And through Night of Adventure, over these last 6 years, I've managed to build a really amazing community of people who go out and do amazing things and also want to share their stories, but also want to hear the stories of other people as well. So we've had people come in and talk about circumnavigations to Queen Charlotte Islands, walking across the Sahara Desert, running across the Gambia, bicycling across Canada, canoeing across Canada, all kinds of different various rivers across Canada as well. There's been all kinds of amazing talks, and this year is going to be the best one yet. So I'm started off with myself talking about my 1,300 kilometer canoe trip from this past summer. Next month, I have a fellow coming in named Joel Hornberg, and he is the provincial expert on Nordic skating. So Nordic skating is using really long blades to skate over the frozen lakes. Also includes kick sledding and cross-country skiing and other winter sports as well, but primarily skating on the frozen lakes. We have a really short window of time where we get to enjoy that in Nova Scotia, and it's one of the coolest things you could ever imagine. And his passion for it is like through the roof. It'll blow you out of this world. So we'll be back here in 3 weeks from tonight. So Thursday, December 6th at 8 p.m. And Joel will be talking about that. After that, I have a couple really cool presentations lined up as well. So be excited. We do things pretty old school around here still. I have an email sign-up sheet here that I plug into my Google email list. And there's over 250 people on that list now. I will not pepper you with emails, but once a month through these winter seasons during daylight savings to keep you informed of awesome things going on around you and the people within our community, but also I'll keep you informed of expeditions that are happening right now that I think you should be following, such as people going to the South Pole, which is a thing that starts right about now. So Antarctic expeditions are right now, as well as Atlantic rowing expeditions are right now. So that is the season that we're in, and there's a lot of really amazing things that I think you should know about. So if you want to be on that list, you can sign up here the old-fashioned way, and I'll get you in. Thank you. Night of Adventures is supposed to be a comfortable place for everybody, so if you need to get up and leave in the middle, it's no big deal. If you have to go to the bathroom, go. But also, most importantly, if you have any questions along the way, just shout them out. Just shout them out and interrupt me as we go. I want you all to feel as comfortable as possible. Cool? Any questions? No? Saw a couple of hands right off the bat.
What's about music?
Yeah. Oh, is there music playing back there? Okay. So yes, I have much to cover. So we will get going. This is me just being silly up there. So the dream, where did this all come from? This all started, as many big expeditions or big adventures do, started in my mind probably 7 or 8 years ago. And it all started with the idea of connecting the Pacific Ocean with the Arctic Ocean under human power. And our original idea was to hike the Chilkoot Trail and then ride the bicycles across the Yukon Territories to the North Canal Road, up to Norman Wells, and then somehow get over the copper mine and go down. I don't think we entirely understood the difficulties of those things when we dreamed up the idea, but it was the idea nonetheless. So then I got to know a woman in Toronto through the Wilderness Canoeing Symposiums, the WCA, Wilderness Canoe Association. It's the paddling group for Southern Ontario, and as you can imagine, it's quite large. They have their annual conference every year in February. Highly recommend everybody go to that. It's a phenomenal event. It's a whole weekend long, full of canoeing presentations. I presented there a couple of years ago, and I met this wonderful woman named Eva Kinklova, and we hit it off right away. And so through certain life circumstances, I found myself last fall, right about this time, wondering what I'm going to be doing next summer. And I promised myself that it was going to be a really long canoe trip. So the only person I knew to call was Eva. So I gave Eva a call and I said, Eva, I really want to go do a trip. I missed your Arctic trip this summer. Couldn't make it, but I, by damn it, am going to go with you somewhere next summer. So she said, why don't you come up with an idea, Dave, and I'll come up with an idea, and then we'll pitch it out to the whole community of paddlers in Canada and New England, North America, and see who we get the most bites from, see what's the sexiest, and if we can get people to come along with us. Because for various reasons, mainly safety, one boat, two people is not the safest. It's the fastest, but it's definitely not the safest. So having people come along with you makes things safer, and it also reduces the cost for transportation, because the major cost of these trips is getting to the start point and getting home afterwards. So by having more people involved, we can reduce those costs. So I came up with this idea after looking at that original trip, the Chilkoot Trail and the multi-sport thing. I came up with this new idea, and this new idea involved a lot of canoeing. And this isn't the greatest map, but I can get right up here and show you. So the idea became, what if you crossed the northern territories of Canada and the United States by canoe? And became, so this is ongoing dream, this is a 3-year plan. And so to take our route from this summer, which I'll go into great detail with here in a minute, is down the Tishu, the Keel, and the Mackenzie, and through the Kamsel Trail to the Great Slave Lake. And then to go back where we finished off and paddle the Great Slave Lake over to Pikes Portage, to Artillery Lake, and down the length of the Teelon to Baker Lake. And then to go back a third year to the place that we started, which is one of the highlights of why I picked this place to start, is that I could go back to the exact place that started this expedition and go down the Yukon side of the mountains, down the South McMillan River to the Yukon River, and take that all the way out to the coast of Alaska. So essentially through 3 paddling seasons, I could potentially cross Alaska, the Yukon, and the Northwest Territories by canoe. So that's the dream. That's the whole idea. That's the concept and where it came from. And when I pitched this phase of the expedition to Eva and the whole paddling community, we got a lot of hits, a lot of interest. And it has nothing against Eva's idea. It was fantastic as well. It was just really remote and much more committing. It was going to be a Kazan River trip, starting in Saskatchewan and working our way north and meeting Baker Lake. And there just wasn't enough interest to really pursue it, but not to mean that we won't in the future. So the whole idea of this trip, as I explained before, was to take a big chunk out of the North American continent and to make it a badass trip. Just wanted to do something that was really cool. Now, with any major expedition or long canoe trip, it's inevitable that you go down rivers, but you also have to go up rivers. It's just the way the country's laid out. And for us, we went down 3 rivers, the Tishu, the Keel, and the Mackenzie, and we went up 2 rivers, the Great Bear River and the Kamsel River, and through this we crossed one really outrageously big lake, Great Bear Lake, which is the 7th largest lake in the world, the biggest lake entirely with Canada, and the Arctic Circle runs right through the middle of it, so you can imagine how cold it is. Now, all these trips, they start months and months and months of time before you even leave, before you even get to the starting point. It's often said that 90% of the work is done by the time you get all of your gear, your food, and your people to the starting point. After that, it's all the complications are gone. You just need to get in and get going. So we started in about February in earnest. Eva was the true leader of this trip. She had the most experience. She's done maybe 12 to 15 of these 50-plus day Arctic canoe trips. But she was nice enough to let me pretend that I was helping co-organize it, which is really nice of her for the experience as well. So what we did, the logistics on this trip was, I'm working right now as a school teacher. So on the last day of school last year on June 29th, I woke up in the morning and I went to work. And I worked all day, and when work ended, I drove straight to the airport. And I flew to Edmonton, and then I connected and went to Whitehorse.
landed in Whitehorse at about midnight, and I was given a hotel name and a room number. And some of the people on the trip I never even really met. So I wander into this hotel hoping it's the right one. I wander up to the room, hit the door, scratch my head. Really hope this is it. Knock, knock, knock. And lo and behold, Eva opens the door. There she is. And the team is finally reunited. I got a wonderful 4 hours of sleep that night before we were up, getting ready, packing our final stuff before the shuttle came. And we launched into an 18-hour shuttle drive, which got us to the starting point. Before even all that happened, I spent months trying to organize my section of the food. So the way our team decided to do this was that you were responsible. So on the first part, there's 7 people. In the second part, there's 4 people. So in the first part, you were responsible for making all the food for all the people, 1 every 7 days. So this up here, this is on the left side, is all the food for part 1. So that's 7 people's food for 3 days, because it's a 21-day section. I know it sounds complicated. But this process, this part of the whole expedition planning is huge. Like you can't go if you don't have really good food. And the way that it works out based on weight is that it should be 2 pounds per person per day. And the way that I organize it always is through calorie base. So I made sure everybody was getting 3,500 calories a day. It also actually, even though I calculated through calories, it worked out to be exactly 2 pounds per person per day. So for 7 people, 21 days in the first section, significant amount of food. Then we had 35 days food for 4 people in the second section. So it was a lot of food. We had 60-liter barrels, and they were jam-packed, very, very heavy. But they had all the guaranteed food that we needed, plus all the supplementary we caught through fishing. So that shuttle I was telling you about, we started in Whitehorse, and it took us 8 hours to do the first section of the shuttle. And we drove up to Carcross, where we turned right and went to Ross River. In Ross River, we got on a cable ferry, which took us across the Pelly River and onto the North Kennel Road. Now, the North Kennel Road was built during World War II in partnership with the USA, as they were worried about the Japanese bombing the coast. They wanted to come up with an alternative way to move oil around. So they came up with this brilliant plan to pump oil from Norman Wells all the way to the coast of Alaska through the Mackenzie Mountain Range. And in doing so, in the process, they built the North Kennel Road. Now, anybody looking for a real badass adventure, you should put the North Kennel Road onto your radar. From the border from McMillan Pass, the road is quite well maintained, right up to McMillan Pass. It's totally drivable. But then after that, the final 350 kilometers to Norman Wells, it just completely falls apart. Northwest Territories do no work on it and is now considered a heritage trail. But every year people are hiking it with pack rafts or mountain biking it or running it. And sometimes once in a while in the winter, somebody will attempt to ski it. But keep the North Kennel Road on your mind. Look it up when you go home. It's a really, really cool thing. So even driving up there, it took us 8 hours to get to Ross River. But little did we know the last 250 kilometers were going to take us 10 hours of shake, rattle, and roll. It was just boom, 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 all the way up. It took a long time, and not everybody was super happy about it. I forgot to plug this in. Excuse me. Yeah. So we shuttled up there in these 15-passenger vans, and we didn't know our outfitter was Up North Adventures. They were outfitters for this, and we went in. This one on the left was our vans. We fed our whole crew and all of our gear into there. And then little did we know, but Camp Wanapitei from Ontario was actually going to the exact same place on the exact same day as us. Purely coincidental, and we didn't know until the shuttle came to pick us up. So they're rolling along in their 15-passenger van. We had a support truck with a trailer on it with their hardshell canoes. They didn't follow. They stayed on the same river as us as one day before turning off, going up some very obscure river creek, crossing a height of land, going down the Hess, and disappearing into the wilderness with a group of 16-year-old kids for 50 days. Very cool thing. Another cool thing. So there's all kinds of amazing people out there doing amazing things.
Is there one right behind you?
Thank you, Phil. Now this is Stefan was our driver. He's come from away in Whitehorse, originally from Germany. This is his 5th time doing this shuttle up on the North Kennel Road, and he was incredible. Really, really nice guy. He slept in the van that night before turning around and driving all the way back. And the last thing that he said to us, he was really nice and had a lot of really great stories, but the last thing he said to us, he says, "Don't get yourself dead." Okay. He says, "You're on your own now. I'm driving away. Like, you're on your own. Don't get dead." Thanks for the vote of confidence, Stefan. Appreciate it. Now, I know some of you probably noticed that Camp Juan Vitae had their hard shell canoes. We decided to go with a very different method of canoes, is that we took these ones here. They're called pack canoes. So essentially, it's like a skin-on-frame kayak, but the frame is aluminum poles, and the skin is made out of PVC. So the way that these guys work, they're called pack canoes, pack with a K. They're with the full deck, brand new. They cost about $4,500, so they're not cheaper than a hard shell with the deck, but comparable price. But what they allow you to do is that they roll up into a bag that's about yay big, and they weigh exactly 70 pounds, which is the maximum weight you can fly on a commercial plane. So you can take your canoe in a bag, put it on Air Canada, fly anywhere in the world, take it out, drive it wherever you need to go, and then assemble it on the spot and have a ready-to-go canoe. And these are the boats that we took on this whole expedition. So like anything, there's pros and cons to these boats. The pros is their ability to move around. But their cons is that they really do need to be treated like a cedar canvas would. So they're quite delicate. We did put some holes in them, but we came with like full-on repair kits and we're able to fix everything on site. But at the same time, like, you can't be running into rocks full speed or at all. You can't do a lot of things that you would do in a hard shell, and so they're not very forgiving. But they are great. The other thing they allow you to do if you go to really remote places and you have to charter a plane to get yourself in or out, is they really reduce the amount of cargo that you have to pack, because hard shells, they take up a lot of room. And if you have to charter a second flight just because you can't get your canoes in, you just took your cost from $8,000 to $16,000, so you may as well have just gotten some pack canoes. You would have gotten them for free at that point. So that's the reason why a lot of people prefer these canoes these days for expedition, wilderness, northern style tripping. You'll see lots of pictures of them as we go through, so you get a better idea of how they actually handle and maneuver. The crew that we had. So we threw it out to the universe to see who would want to come with us. We knew Eva and I were on board. This is Eva down here in the bottom left. Amazing woman. I really got to know her really well on this trip. We paddled together a lot. We spent a lot of time in the canoe, not talking. After her, we had Carmen. Carmen's on the top left. She came out from the Ottawa Canoe Club. She was our whitewater expert. She could find lines going through things that nobody else could see, and she would tell us exactly what we needed to do. And we always watched her and Robert Dale, who was down here. They paddled together, and we would watch them go through everything first and then mimic their line exactly, copycat. And she helped us really get through the first river. Robert Dale had previously gone on a trip with Eva to the Hood River. They did a 55-day expedition through Northwest Territories and Nunavut. It's a really intense trip, so he was a really good fit. She was a whitewater paddler. And then we got these two. Alistair's on the top and Patty's on the bottom. They're both paramedics from Toronto, worked frontline for 35 years. So we had the team doctors on board. They've done expedition-style trips in the past, and we're strong whitewater paddlers. And then, because we weren't sure about numbers, last minute I threw it out to the Vermont Paddlers Gathering, which happens every year. Alistair and his wife, Margaret, really wonderful people, really great event that happens down there. I put out a wanted ad just to see if anyone else wanted to come, and Chris Giard came into our lives. He stepped straight out of the 1890s and into our lives. And the first day that I met him, I think he showed up wearing wool pants and the wool vest and tilly hat. And he must have had like a buck knife in his pocket. Oh yeah, he came straight out of the 1890s. This kid was born in the wrong century. So again, you're gonna wonder, well, you had brought canoes, Dave, and you had 3 canoes, that's 6 people. What did the odd person out do? Chris on the previous year had been up in Alaska and had done a pack rafting trip, which again, I have more pictures of and you'll see, but he went down in a pack raft for the first 21 days before he shipped it home and repaired it. So that's the crew of 6 plus me is 7. And then later on the trip, and I'll explain this as we go, we had Eric Ward from Greenville, Maine come out and join us. AKA Miracle Boy, AKA Wonder Bread. He turned out to be a fantastic paddler, great part of the team, and he had experience bowling canoe, which paid out in spades later on. Also, the perfect tent mate. He had years ago a really bad sinus infection of some kind and lost all sense of smell and taste. So whenever I farted or took off my socks at night, he couldn't smell it anyways. And every time you'd hand him a bowl of food, he would just say, "This is delicious. Thank you so much." He could taste nothing and smell nothing. He was perfect. And he worked hard. He did everything we asked him to do. So it worked out really well, too. And as I'll explain more, it worked out really well for Eric. It's just a group picture of us standing beside the Mackenzie River at the end of section 1 before we started off on section 2. Now, all that behind you, I can finally start talking about the trip. Yay! We decided to use the Tishu River as the access point. We used this because for a number of reasons. We could get there by car. We knew we could drive there on the North Canal Road on mile 212. We knew it's not run by any commercial companies at all, so there's very little information on it. And the last group to have paddled down this river previous to us was 3 years previous. So we knew it was possible. Nobody had ever done it in pack canoes before, so we wanted to give it a shot. This river, it dropped 1,100 feet in 42 kilometers. So it was really rock and roll. It really just kind of fell off the mountains. And it was also the crux of the whole expedition because we didn't know a whole lot about the river and if we could actually make it through. We knew that if we could paddle the first 42 kilometers, we could make it the other 1,250. We knew we would make it through the rest of it. We just didn't know if we would make it through the first 40. And it really put the pressure on us to take our time and make sure we could run all the rapids as safely as possible. Because if something happened to one of the boats or one of the crew members, that was it. All the work and money that we had spent to get to the starting point, it was over. We're done. We're going home. And it's not a fun way too. You're walking out. Like, this is not a canoe trip anymore. So there was a lot of pressure on us to play safe on this river and to make it down the best we could. And where we started up in the mountains, it was literally this wide. It was as wide as like between these two tables. This was the size of the river. And when you walked up a flank of the mountain right there at McMillan Pass, you can see this tiny little pond that the Tishu River comes out of that ambles its way out of the mountains. And then on the other side of the pond, you can see the slope drop off into the Yukon side. It's this tiny little pond right in the mountain pass with Northwest Territories going one way and the Yukon River Yukon Territories going the other way. It was really an incredible place. And so through the whole trip, we only had 3 rest days. And one of them was the first day when we got to the put-in to help assemble some food, do some group talks, put the canoes together, and then to explore. So we really we went to hike the mountain, had some really close encounters with mountain caribou, which is really cool up there too. Another thing that you're probably all noticing about this landscape is that there's no trees. Because we are right on the Yukon Northwest Territories border, we're in the Mackenzie Mountains, which is the northern extension of the Rocky Mountains. We're quite far north, but we're also quite high in altitude as well. And the landscape, it's not absent of vegetation, but it's absent of any kind of trees. So there's these willow and alder scrubs pretty much everywhere that you can bushwhack your way through. But if you said, hey, let's go for a hike, I want to climb that mountain, you just start climbing that mountain. You could just kind of point at it and say, we're going to go up there today. The other amazing thing about this landscape and time of year is that the sun never really set either. It didn't get dark. So after a long day of paddling, you could have your dinner and then go for a really long hike if you wanted to as well. And just the views, it was spectacular. So the first 10 or 15 kilometers of the Tishu was just like the Meander River, the Gaspereau River, some of the smaller creeks we have around here, just kind of meandering and braided and coming in and out and coming in and out before it really started to collect those streams and turn into some of the bigger rapids. But it was a blast. And the water was super cold up here. It's all coming off of glacial melt and snow melt. I'm battling a bit of a cold. But as you can see, as the river starts to pick up, we were hit with all these really big boulder gardens. And we knew they were coming. Like, we had read trip reports of 2 previous trips we've done it. But some of our saving graces were that all the rocks were really round. So we knew that the boats would slide really well over them and there'd be little risk of tearing the PVC skins on them. But at the same time, it took a long time to pick our way, to find routes to go through all of these rapids. Because some of them would be, 500, 600, 700, 800 meters long. And it would look just like this. Some of them would be really wide. And like, how are we ever even going to find a path through this? Like, we can't wrap our boats. We can't hit any rocks. Like, how is this even possible? So Carmen instructed us and trained us a little bit. And we would everybody would walk all the way down to the bottom of the rapid to make sure we could actually get there. And then we would start scouting from the bottom all the way back up to the top. And as we went, it took a lot of time. Sometimes it would take an hour or more, 2 hours to just scout one rapid to make sure that we all felt comfortable running it. But the alternative to that is portaging. It would take just as long, significant amount of work. So you'd memorize the rapid from the bottom all the way back up to the top. And you'd walk through it with your partner and you'd pick landmarks along the way up on the bank. So if there's a tree overhang, you're like, well, when we get to that tree, we know there's going to be rock downstream and we have to be on the left side or we have to turn the boat to a certain angle. And so you kind of work through it this way. The best you can, but you can't remember everything. Sometimes you just smile and nod. Smile and nod. My partner and I, Eva, we had never really paddled whitewater together. I had met her once in Ontario to do a quick briefing one morning, but that was it. But because she was so highly skilled at the trade and I have a fair amount of experience myself, we decided it best that she goes in the bow and I would go in the stern. And we had this really amazing thing happen where we didn't actually need to verbally communicate at all while we were paddling these really big rapids. Well, I would trust that she would see a route or see an obstacle and steer us around it, and she trusted that I would follow her. It was that simple. So I essentially just followed Eva down this river with no real choice. But like if she did a big draw on the left side, I would do a pry on the right side, and the whole canoe would move over, and so on and so forth. But we would talk it all through, but there was no real verbal communication that happened between us, which was really magical. I've never had the opportunity to paddle with such a person. This is a great picture here of Carmen and Rob going through a big set. We have the front spray decks on here, but not the back. I'm not entirely sure why we decided that a good idea, but for some reason we did, and it worked. It worked out anyways. So as we got further down the river, those big rock gardens that you saw in the previous picture, they started to become more funneled and more canyon-like on sharp corners in the river. So here's Chris Giard. Chris Giard decided to bring along his pack raft with him. It was about a 12-foot boat with inflatable balloons around the outside of it that he could store at dry bags. He could store his tent and his personal gear inside the tubes of the pack raft, and then have, I think that's his food on the front and some camera gear on the back. He used a kayak paddle and had a full spray deck over the top of him while wearing a dry suit. So the kid was invincible. He didn't have to scout anything ever. He could run into anything that he wanted to. He could shoot rapids blindly. He ended up just sitting at the bottom of most rapids, very patiently waiting for us. And we'd get to the bottom. He'd like, have another spoon for you guys. He'd just sit there whittling pieces of wood. I made a little bear today, or got another spoon for you. Really nice guy though. So he had a blast in the pack raft going down this whole river. And to the best of our knowledge, the first person to go in a pack raft down this one, the Keel, and definitely the Mackenzie, because going in the Mackenzie in the pack raft was not a smart idea. I put this picture on here. I really, really love this picture because it gives you a sense of the gradient of the river, but also the land. And it's another thing that I've never really experienced until this trip. with the lack of trees, you could see the whole landscape sloping down. And you're always wondering, like, you can see the mountains far off, like, I wonder if the river's going to go around that mountain, or is it going to go over there? Is that the valley we're going to go into? And with this picture here, without the trees marking up the horizon, you see the whole gradient of the river starting to come together. It really leaves you wondering, like, wow, I wonder what's going to come up next. The other amazing thing about the Tishu River and the lack of trees is that it allowed us really great opportunities to go hiking as well. So a lot of people will go to these northern destinations, not only for the canoeing, but also for the walking, because your ability to move around allows you to get on top of mountains rather easily. And so we spent a number of days hiking up these mountains, and taking pictures and hanging out. We would see on the tops of all these peaks is all shale. Sometimes you find fossils, which is really cool, like from the bottom of the seafloor once upon a time ago. But you'd also find a lot of caribou antlers. And I don't know why they would shed their antlers on the top of a mountain. But we were told before we left to leave any antlers that we found along the way alone, because they provide important food for the locals in the wintertime, whether that be the coyotes and martens and wolves, or just the little mice and lemmings running through the snow. So I did just that. We left it all behind. It's also quite illegal to travel across provincial territorial borders with antlers. I wasn't going to fly with it. Actually, the only souvenir I brought back from the whole trip was this rock right here. I picked this up on the shore of Great Bear Lake. I'm pretty sure it's iron ore, but it has it's really shiny. And it kind of spoke to me, and I feel a bit selfish, but I brought it home. So the Tishu River, again, so the big round rocks for us to do a lot of scouting on. We had good water when we came down here. It was only July 1st when we started on this river, which we knew we needed good water. If it was too dry, we knew we weren't going to make it down. And if it was too high, we knew it was going to be really dangerous and fast. 1,100 feet and 40 kilometers is fairly steep. It's that almost 40 feet a kilometer. It's, a lot of that gradient was lost right at the end. There's always time for fun. So I put this picture in here as well because these are Arctic daisies, and they're the only of daisies of this variety that we saw along the river. And they happen to be growing in the fire pit from the previous trip, 3 years previous to come down. So from the ash, from the wood that had been burnt, the daisies found this the perfect environment to grow in. And it was just the most amazing thing. So we left it there and we made our own fire pit right beside it. And hopefully the next group that goes down will see even more daisies. Just coming down was pretty rock and roll, and we had a pretty good time until we got to the port. We knew this was coming. We knew the portage was there all along, and we knew once we got there, it was the last gate to get into the Keel River and kind of safety. But the problem was that we thought it was 2.5 kilometers long. It would take a full day. Turns out it was 4 kilometers long, and it took us 2 full days. Mainly because there's no trail, and it was essentially a bushwhack. We essentially bushwhacked our whole way through following game trails. The river lost a lot of its gradient in this section that we ended up walking, but I've summarized it here in a couple of videos that I'm going to show you.
Here we are, day 2 of the portage. That was 2.5 kilometers. Now it's 3.5 kilometers. We camped in the middle of it last night, and it was fine. Buggy, but fine. Now we're trying to get to the keel. It's going to be a huge victory roar when we get there, because this is taking forever. As you can see, I've got 2 packs on now. I did 5 passes on the last leg. Don't suspect it would be any different today, but we'll get there. In the meantime, I got to try to pay attention and follow this game trail. It's crazy how much game trail, how well they're used. They look like human paths, but they're full of moose prints, caribou prints, grizzly bear prints, wolf prints. There's animals all over the place here. It's crazy. It's a beautiful, beautiful place to be. Yeah, I gotta go.
So yeah, so we made it a couple of kilometers on the first day. We were mostly lost. We kind of knew where we needed to go, but didn't know exactly how to get there. We found a little stream running through, and essentially sphagnum moss. Decided it'd be best to camp right there. I'm just going to read an excerpt from my journal. For those of you who follow my expeditions in real time, know that I update every day with some trip information and a daily haiku. So I'm going to read this to you here. We started our one and only portage of 4 kilometers at 11 a.m. 7 hours later, we settled on a camping spot halfway along the portage. We are all super tired and smell real bad. It will be good to swim in the Kiel and do some laundry. Bugs are real thick here. I smell bad. The haiku. Camp on the portage. My stink is really stinky. Tent mate stink is worse. So that pretty much summarizes the portage. It was, generally speaking, a fairly frustrating experience. I mean, just given the demographics of the group, not everybody was capable of carrying everything that they brought along with them. And that left Chris and I to do a lot of the grunt work. I carried 5 loads over the entire portage. So being only 4 kilometers long, I walked close to 35 or 40 kilometers getting all the stuff over, including the canoes. Which is totally fine. It's totally fine with me because these are the things that I really love doing. When you really, really need to push yourself, when you really step out of your comfort zone and things get really hard, that's where the best of people come out or the worst of people come out. But that's when you know if the group dynamic is going to work. This little one here kind of summarizes it all for me. This is the first shot of the Kiel River after 2 days of work. I think we're standing on a cliff, Chris.
I think we are. Nice.
Where are we at, Chris? Is the camera backwards?
That was pretty much it. This pretty much sums up the whole experience. It was generally pretty frustrating and considerable amount of work, but totally worth it in the end. You're traveling through these crazy game trails and sometimes open country and sometimes really thick bush. The trees started up as we got closer to the Kiel River again. Sometimes you'd be walking along the trail and you'd be all by yourself. You wouldn't really know where the rest of the crew was, and you'd kind of like the hair in the back of your neck would stand up, and you really knew something was watching you. You couldn't really figure out where it was. And you come across these like scratch trees, these rubbing posts for the grizzly bears, and you just sing a song and keep your head down and get the work done. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. It was a common theme for some of the other dangerous situations we got into. Once we got onto the Kiel River, it was really, really nice. And the upper Kiel River that we got to paddle, the top 60 kilometers of it is a section of river that most people, again, don't get to see because the only real access to is through the Tishu River. Like you think the mountains would start to go away as you get further down a river, but they just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and they came in closer, and the canyons started appearing. And there was a lot of really fun whitewater in the upper Kiel. The Tishu and the upper Kiel just started turning into a really good time where there was a lot of water moving through and not a lot of risk to hit rocks. And the fishing started to turn really good too. We didn't catch any fish on the Tishu whatsoever. Don't know why. But once we got onto the Kiel and we found the tributaries coming in, we knew exactly where to start throwing the 5 of diamonds. And these are the kind of fish that we caught up here. So this is a Dolly Vartan. Or also known as a bull trout. And this one here would have been, I'm guessing, in the range of 15 pounds because it went from the ground up to my hip. It was that big. And this guy, he went in the frying pan, or girl, they went in the frying pan. And I almost exclusively caught all my fish on a 5 of diamonds. And their jaws were so hard, I would set the hook like 4 or 5 times and I couldn't get them in. I lost a lot of fish that way. This one here actually bent 2 of the hooks straight on me. And I could get it out with my finger by the time I got it onto the shore. But I was pretty happy about this. And so was everybody else, because it was a fresh source of protein that we could all eat. So it's something a little bit different from the food that we've been eating every day. And it was really, really delicious. The upper Kiel also featured these really amazing geological features, which I knew nothing about because I'm not a geologist. but they're really cool to look at. And there's canyons everywhere you went. So if it was anywhere else, if it was in southern Canada, every 30 kilometers would be a new national park because it was so absurdly beautiful. Just crazy canyons everywhere we went. This one here was called Equi Canyon. You can see our tents are down here in the bottom right corner. This was like an unbelievable campsite. And every night you'd be like, wow, is the campsite going to get, this is a 5-star campsite. Is it going to get any better than this? It can't possibly be better than this. And then you would come to a place like this and you'd be like, wow, this is incredible. So Equi River's coming in from the side there. It has this glacial blue water. This one might be photoshopped a little bit, I don't know. But the water really is that color. That doesn't make you too dizzy. Little panorama of the view there. And again, so there's trees down below, as you can see, but you can still access these peaks fairly easily for climbing in the afternoons. It was really phenomenal part of the trip. Now, once you get down to the Natla confluence, the Natla is a separate river altogether that drains into the Kiel. It's semi-popular. There's maybe 2 or 3 groups that do it every year. It comes together at the Natla Kiel confluence, which is this spot here, and it is accessible by float plane. So commercial outfitters such as Black Feather and Up North Adventures, they would run commercial trips on this part of the Kiel River every year. So if that's something you're into, you could get onto a trip, fly into this spot, and then canoe out. It would be a really nice 14 or 15-day trip. The Kiel really pumps too, like it's really moving really fast. We were covering 40, 50, 60 kilometers in 4 hours of paddling. It was really just flushes you down. We have 450 kilometers to paddle on the Kiel itself, plus the T-shoot. Now, Chris, coming out of the 1890s, he brought along, because we did the meals like in segments, like I'd be in charge of dinner, breakfast, lunch, and then the next person would do dinner, breakfast, lunch. That way, dinner time, if you needed to prepare bannock or bread for the next day's lunch, you could make it. Or if you're Chris, you needed to get your sourdough pancake starter going. So he brought along his grandmother's sourdough starter. I believe it to be 60 years old or something. He's been carrying it around with him since he was born. I don't know, but it was really delicious. So every night he would start the sourdough, and in the morning he would cook his pancakes. So in the first section, we got to eat these amazing pancakes every 7th day, and then on the second section, every 4th day.
Should I ask how you kept it warm?
Yeah, he put it in a sock and kept it in the sleeping bag with him. Yeah, he slept with it. Yeah. Great question. He slept with it every night of the trip. Yeah. Just for us. Yeah. There's another great picture there, Chris sitting in his back boat waiting for us to do something. He's 22 years old. Like, he had so much energy. He's ready to go all the time. Never complained. You leave it to him. You're like, Chris, when do you want to stop paddling? And he'd say, like, I don't know, when the sun sets. I'm like, Chris, it's not going to set for another month. He's like, yeah, I know.
Never complained about his clothes getting wet or taking a long time to dry.
No, he never did. No. He never did. It was often so windy that when he did laundry, you just throw it up in the bushes, and because the sun wouldn't set, the wind would dry it off. And by the next morning, when you're ready to go, you'd have clean clothing. I'm not entirely sure Chris ever did laundry. Again, he's a 22-year-old bachelor. Like, to tell you the truth, I might have only done laundry once or twice. Like, it just wasn't a priority because my tent mate couldn't smell anyways. Again, we had some really good opportunities to hike along the Kiel River. It was really gorgeous. This is my poor attempt at a time lapse. There's ample firewood everywhere. These rivers don't get used a whole lot by groups and sheer numbers. There's not a lot of people going down these rivers every year. So the Kiel River, it's not super well known, but it is the first river north of the Nahanni. So if you know in your mind what the Nahanni River looks like, super famous. The Kiel River's pretty much exactly the same, but it doesn't have Virginia Falls. It doesn't have a 100-foot waterfall on it. So it does actually, in fact, make it quite a bit more accessible to people. There are hot springs along the way on it. We didn't manage to find any. not that we were in a hurry, but we were in a bit of a hurry. We had to go. This is an expedition trip, not a vacation, though it felt like that at times. That's another story for a different night. But like the Kiel River was spectacular. It is located on Satu Dene land. And I went ahead and I called the chief before we left in Talita asking for permission. So I call him up and I say, hey, we're going to be traveling through your land. I'm just calling to let you know and ask for your permission. And his exact words were, and what if I say no? I think for a second, I'm like, well, I'm just calling you out of courtesy. We're going to go anyways. I'm just calling it a courtesy. I just want you to know that we're going to be traveling through your land. He says, okay, I guess I'll see you when you get here. That's it, and he hung up. But I would highly recommend if you're going to be traveling pretty much anywhere in the country, but especially in the territories, in the face of reconciliation, to find the chief, call them, and consideration, let them know, or even if you have enough time, ask for permission to travel through their land, because it is in fact their land, and it is beautiful. So once we got down the Kiel River, we made it to the Mackenzie River. Now the Mackenzie River was really phenomenal. It was a dream come true for me to lay eyes on it, because it is one of the few rivers that teachers actually teach children about in elementary school. And we've been hearing about the Mackenzie River all of our lives as being this great, wonderful thing, this massive thing. It's the 10th longest river in the world, and it's in Canada. But very few Canadians ever really get to lay eyes on it. So to get there and be there in blood and to see it in person was really a sight to behold. And where we got to it was about halfway down the main length of it between Great Slave Lake and the Arctic Ocean. And at its narrowest point where we were, it was still 2 kilometers wide. It's a really, really big river. They're not lying about that. And deep, don't know. Good question. It must be. It's deep enough that they have really big barges running up and down it all year, or during the summer months. But it's such a big river that in order to effectively ferry across it, it would take upwards of an hour just to ferry across to the other side of the river. And sometimes you'd be like in the middle and you'd be sitting there and you'd be like, oh man, we're not really going that fast. All the while knowing that the current's moving at 8 to 12 knots an hour. So it's really 15, 16 kilometers an hour. It's a conveyor belt of water just going downhill, and you're stuck along for the ride. So you're floating down the middle of this giant river. You're like, all right, I think I have to go pee. Maybe we'll go have a break. Let's aim for that eddy over there. So then everybody will start paddling towards that eddy, and it very well become apparent you're never going to make that eddy. So you pick another one, and then you miss it. And then the whole team gets spread out along the whole river because everybody misses the intended eddy by a full kilometer. Because the whole river is just a giant conveyor belt of water, and it has you, it's just pulling you down. And we had really, really good weather while we were on it. We had 100 kilometers to paddle from the mouth of the Kiel down to the community of Talita. Campsites were scarce, so we only really made one campsite. We did 40 kilometers, found this campsite. We took a rest day here as well, because the team, some people were flying home. It was the end of their trip. They just wanted to relax a bit before jumping on their planes. So we found this really beautiful site. We stayed here for 2 nights, and then finished it off the last 60 kilometers on the last day. There's lots of people who go out there to paddle the Mackenzie River. You could go do it. I personally think it would be brain-numbingly boring, but if that resonates with you and you want to go do it, then I would encourage you to go do it. It's also come to my attention lately that there's an ice road that runs all the way down it. I think that would be a really fantastic bike ride. So if anybody wants to go for a winter bike ride with me, I think the Mackenzie River is where we need to go. Just throwing that out there. It is winter now, after all. Onwards. So we roll into the community of Talita. I picked this picture because in my mind, this is what a northern community looks like. Most often you have a rutted gravel road with buildings and things coming down. Has anyone, show me a show of hands, anyone have any time living in a northern community? Yeah, a little bit? Okay. So I have fond memories. This is not to say anything bad about these communities. I've spent much time up there. Carry on. So we get to the community of Talita. Now, this is where Wonder Boy comes in. So we're on the Keel River. We're on day 8 of the expedition, and Patty comes up to Eva and I, and she says, at lunchtime too, right before running a really big set. It's really poor timing. But she comes up to us, she says, look, this trip's way harder than I thought it was going to be. I don't really like it. And when we get to Toledo, I'm going home, and there's not a damn thing you can do to stop me. We're like, okay, but that leaves us only 3 people to finish the last 35 days of this expedition. Like, what are we going to do? So we have satellite communicators, and we decided to send out 160 characters to specific people. We need help. We need a replacement. So I picked Dusan Sudak. Are you here right now? Okay. I picked a couple of other people, and we sent it out again to the wide community. I picked my buddy Dan Renard, who lives down in Greenville, Maine. And I'm pretty sure this is how the conversation went. He got the text message. He's sitting in his office, and he goes, does anybody want to go on a 35-day canoe trip in the Northwest Territories for $900? And the person sitting next to him goes, well, my husband was supposed to go on a moose hunting trip in Alaska in September, but his friends just bailed, and he's laid off. Maybe he'll want to go. And bada bing, bada boom. And the ball started rolling, and we did a satellite interview, less of an interview, more of a conversation, very direct conversation in the mountains. And then within 7 days of finding out, Eric Ward gets in a plane from Portland, Maine, flies to JFK, to Calgary, to Yellowknife, to Norman Wells, to Toledo. He gets on 6 or 7 planes, and he flies all the way to Toledo to meet us. And we said, as part of the deal, Patty, just because, so you're leaving, that's fine. We found a replacement that's great for us. It's a miracle, but Miracle Boy's going to come save us. And but because you're leaving, you have to leave behind all the food for the second part. You have to leave your 60-liter barrel, your tent, and your first aid kit. These are all things that we need in order for the team to continue on. She said, yep, that's fine. So she flew home from Toledo, and we told Eric Ward that we would pay for his flight there. All he would have to cover for the trip was his flight home from Yellowknife.
What was it about the trip that she found so difficult?
I believe it to be a lot of the stressors that came out. It was not a commercial trip. It was an independent trip. So we were all responsible for cooking and each other's safety and the workload. And I think she had done commercial trips in the past where there's a bit more catering involved. I also believe her previous trip to this was about 10 years previous, and she was about 62 at this time. She just found it to be too much. She's also a retired paramedic. And I think when the stresses in real life environments started to come out, a lot of her past in various forms came to the forefront, and I do truly believe they surprised her just as much as it surprised us. Yeah. So we worked with her, and there's no hard feelings to this day, I believe. You know, Patty.
It's interesting not to stress it. It sounds like you're having a great time up to this point.
Right. We did have a great time, Carl. We had a great time.
Like pretty normal feeling stuff to me.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not seeing the stress.
Fair enough. Like, I can't actually comment too much because I'm not Patty, and I shouldn't
No, I'm not
generalize too much.
I mean, there must have been some general. Is it just
Was there a lot of stress? Like, the stresses would have been running the rapids in fragile boats. And then a 2-day portage didn't help. And then just weather and bugs and group dynamics is a big one too. If not everyone's getting along, then that obviously comes through as well, especially when times are hard. Does that help?
Yes.
Just didn't work out for her. Just didn't work out for her. But we managed to find Miracle Boy, and he flew all the way in. So he went on a 35-day canoe trip in the Northwest Territories for $900. It's an opportunity of a lifetime, and it could have been any one of you. We just couldn't find you. We needed that person right away. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and this guy did. So
he just had to show up with clothes.
He just had to show up with his clothing on his back, and that's what he did. So we roll into Toledo, we roll in on the beach, and like a town of about 600 people. And the people who we shipped our food to, they saw us coming, so they drove down in the truck. This all happens in like 20 minutes too. We show up on the beach. Andrea shows up with the truck, drops off her food, and we look down the beach, and there's this white guy walking down with a dry bag and fishing rods in his hand. Well, that must be Eric Ward. And we all came together in the same place at the same time. And so we went through the motions of, we had all of our new food there. Some of the team was leaving, so we had to separate some gear. We had to clean a bunch of stuff. But then Chris looks at me and he goes, Dave, I really don't want to be in the town right now. Like, how fast do you think we can be out of here? Chris, we can probably be out of here tomorrow. So that's what we did. We stayed up most of the night repacking our food, getting everything as organized as we possibly could. And we left the next day at about noon. So the irony of all this is that we flew Eric in because we thought we needed 4 people to take 2 canoes up the Great Bear River. But a couple of days before rolling into Toledo, Eva got a toothache. It really bothered her. And rightfully so, because a toothache and therefore a tooth infection in a wilderness environment is a very serious medical thing, and can very quickly end to the total end of the expedition. So she thought it best. She arranged a dentist appointment in Norman Wells, and she left with a couple of the crew, and she ended up leaving us for a whole 7 days. So she actually missed the entire Great Bear River section. So we ended up with 3 people in 2 canoes anyways. So we get on to the Great Bear River. So on this section actually turned out to be my favorite part of the entire trip. It was also the most difficult part of the whole trip, and most likely one of the most difficult things that I've ever physically done. So what we had to do is we had to ascend this river 113 kilometers using poles and paddles, tracking and lining. So we took 7 days to pull up this river. We knew a previous group the previous year, a group of women, 6 north of 60, had gone up the river. It had taken them 11 days to get up it. They had mostly tracked and walked their boat up the bank, which just seemed like hell to us. So we said to ourselves, well, we're definitely going to do it faster than that because it's definitely competition. And we're going to use a pole as much as possible. Upon further reviewing and reading, once I got home, I found out that some of the old-time adventurers like Franklin and Alexander Mackenzie and those guys, and the Coureur de Bois, they would have gotten up the river in 5 days. So we did pretty good. Those were the toughest people on the planet. So canoe pulling is this really, really amazing sport. I highly recommend everybody who's into canoeing here to get into it or practice it. It really extends the paddling season, especially in this part of the world. It's very intuitive. It's very intuitive for people around the world to stand up in a boat and use a pole to move it around. They do it in Okavango in Africa. They do it in South America. They do it in Italy, in Punting on the Avon, in North America. And in this part of the world, it came from the Abenaki people and the Mi'kmaq and Maliseet of New Brunswick and Maine, where it was mostly used. So it was used when the river was too long to portage beside, but too shallow to really get a purchase with your paddle. So you'd stand up in your canoe with a pole that is twice your height, so about 12 feet long, and you'd use it to propel the canoe forward, just like I'm doing here. Yeah. For standing on it, we had one of those, essentially a yoga mat that we had zip tied onto it. But you just be really careful when you stand where the 2 bars come together. You'd be standing for the most part, yeah, whatever possible. But you're right, Carl. So the pack canoes, they are really flexible and they move a lot. So in whitewater technique, you need to lean a lot. You need to do a lot of leaning downstream. So when you're paddling whitewater, both people would have to lean downstream, and if only the front person leaned, only the front part of the canoe would actually land. So everybody had to lean together. And when you're pulling a canoe, you do a lot of leaning as well. So there was more flex than you would see in a hard shell, a lot more flex than you'd see in a hard shell canoe, but still it was quite efficient. It worked really, really well. It worked really, really well for us going up this. So what we did here is we had one person would go solo in a boat, and then the other 2 people, one person would go in the back and say, let me pull, and the person in the bow would have a really short pole and a paddle beside them, and they would use any means necessary to keep the boat straight and go forward. We tried walking up the bank for a little while. I spent a whole half day walking up the bank of the river. And the whole time, like, this is the most wild part of the whole expedition too. Like, we heard a pack of wolves howling through the night. We saw musk oxen on this river. There's one day I saw 3 lynx on the river. We saw caribou and moose. We saw the most wildlife of the whole trip well on this river. So I'm walking up the bank, like through this thick grass, and like Chris is way ahead and Eric's way behind. I'm thinking to myself, like, man, if I run into a grizzly bear out here, like, it's over. Like, there's nothing I can do about it. So I call over to Eric. I'm like, hey, do you mind if I pull that canoe solo for a little bit? He's like, yeah, no problem. He starts walking up the bank. It's not like a friendly bank either. It's not much fun to walk on. And he walks about 20 minutes and he calls over Chris. He's like, Chris, get in your boat. That was it. Nobody ever walked again. So as we went up the Great Bear River, it started off pretty slow on us. But as we progressively went up the river, every day consecutively got more and more difficult. So after the first day, it was really a half day, we did about 12K. We stopped like, wow, that was really difficult. Tomorrow can't be harder than this. And then the next day would go, and it would be exponentially more difficult than the day before. And you'd get through it and you'd be like, wow, that was really hard. There's no way tomorrow can be harder than that. And then the next day would be exponentially more difficult than the day before. All the way up the Great Bear River for 7 days in a row. It just got harder and harder and harder as we went. We were also traveling as expeditiously as possible because there's really nowhere to camp. There's really no reason to hang out on the Great Bear River. This is what the banks look like. Often really, really slow and full of vegetation or entirely mud banks. So our campsites were almost entirely on really, really awkward angles, and we would always wake up in the bottom of the tent. One time we had to set up the tent so close to the water that you actually had to step into the water to get into the vestibule. Yeah, we just slept praying that the water wasn't going to come up or anything crazy like that. There's nothing we could do about it. And as we're going up the river, summer hits. So we had a week of summer, 7 days of northern summer. And it was really, really hot, that hot western dry. It felt like sitting in a frying pan. So we'd spend a lot of time going up the south bank, trying to stay in the shade as often as possible. But inherently, pulling a canoe gets you really, really, really wet. So you're soaking wet the entire time. And the water coming out of here is about 2 or 3 degrees. We often saw hunks of ice floating down the river. I'm sure there's always a pan of ice floating around Great Bear Lake at all times of the year. I'm sure it never entirely thaws out.
At this point, how much daylight are you?
Are we getting any darkness at this point? The sun is setting at this point, but it's never really getting dark. I never pulled out my headlamp until maybe the second or third last day of the trip. And that was in the tent, trying to write in my journal. But Eva didn't even bring one. Yeah, I brought extra batteries. Just habit. Sometimes you just do things, even though people tell you not to. So as we go up the Great Bear River, we get up to this section called St. Charles Rapids. And again, we knew this was coming as well. And it's where the Richardson Mountains bisect the river. So you have this big mountain range, as you can see behind me. And it's not actually a mountain range. It's kind of like North and South Mountain in the valley. It just looks like a mountain because everything else is so flat around it. But we're in true boreal forest here, and we can see this mountain range coming up on us. And we knew at that point there was a section of rapids that was 8 to 10 kilometers long, and we would have to navigate it. But at the bottom of those rapids was these giant snowbanks. And you can see there's a layer of the snow here. So this would have been multi-year snow, and the snow on the bottom would have been from the previous winter. And what we theorized had happened is that there would have been an ice jam. It would have made a huge pond, dumped the snow high on the banks, and then when the ice jam broke, sending a flood down the river, it would have left this ice behind. But this would have been at the end of July. So we're going up a river the end of July, and there's snow on the banks, which is kind of neat to see because it's pretty hot that day, and you could just roll around, snowball fights, and having a good time. So this is coming up the bottom of St. Charles Rapids with the Richardson Mountains in behind and Chris pulling the canoe solo. Yeah, this is one of my favorite pictures from the whole trip. It has Chris with his magnificent beard, but also just the whole landscape in such a rare place that you don't see a lot of images from. It was a real honor to be able to go up this river. As I mentioned before, it's part of any major northern expedition. You can't just go down rivers. If you really want to go long distance and long time, you have to go up rivers too. And Great Bear River was our one for choosing. As you can see here, it's really moving along at a good clip now. So as we got further up the river, it started to narrow in on us. And it was significant amount of work to push the canoes up. Sometimes you'd be pulling up the bank, say this is the bank here, water, it could drop off immediately to 15 feet, and you couldn't get a purchase, so you have to fall on one side. Sometimes you have to track and walk up the shoreline too. You didn't have much of a choice as to what was going on. So as we're going through the St. Charles Rapids, we have this, and this is essentially what it looked like for about 8 kilometers. And we had been told it best to line up river left, which was the opposite bank, but we didn't do that. We went up river right for some reason, I don't know why, but we decided that best. And the whole time as we're going up through this section, it's now far too steep and fast to be pulling the canoe, so you have to track it. Eric and I took our boat up, and Chris worked his boat solo. He had a really great technique for that. Again, it's an art. It's really a feeling. Once you get it, you get the angle of the bow out into the current, you pull on the stern of the boat. It just slices like butter, and it moves right upstream. It really does take practice, but once you get it, it's really quite efficient. And Chris was actually faster tracking his boat solo than we were tandem. You didn't have to communicate with anybody. So as we're going up here, this was another one of those situations where it was quite dangerous, but it was completely out of our control. So you just keep your head down and keep moving along. Get the work done as fast as you can. We didn't stop to chat. We didn't stop to eat. We didn't stop to do a whole lot in this section. It took hours and hours and hours to get through, because you'd be walking along this scree slope here, and the rocks would be sliding into the water underneath you. Sometimes it'd be big boulders that would roll down, and you'd have to jump out of the way, or they would narrowly miss the canoe. And the whole time we're thinking it's like the hand of God above us, and there's not a damn thing we can do about it. And if he decides to throw a rock at us and destroy our canoe, then we're totally screwed, but there's nothing we can do about it. So let's just keep your head down and keep walking, and we'll get through this as fast as we can. And all the while we're doing this, there are gulls nesting up in the cliffs above us, protecting their babies, and they're dive bombing us, and they're taking the hat right off of our heads. And the river's just ripping along beside us. It's going really fast. It's really deep. If you were to fall in here, it'd be game over. And the water's so cold too. You're only wearing dry pants, and the chances of you getting back to shore are slim. It wasn't the best situation, but again, sometimes you have to do these things in order to get them. So what I had there, they're called dry pants. They're made by Kokatek. They're just dry pants, and they come up about this high with Velcro on the front, and they have booties on the bottom as well. So I would wear a pair of long underwear underneath with the dry pants on top, with neoprene boots over the top of the socks to protect them, and then I just put them into running shoes. I just wore a pair of running shoes on my feet every day. What's the other thing I was going to mention about this? I don't know, but it wasn't a whole lot of fun, but it was necessary. It was stressful. It was stressful, but we did eventually make it through and find a campsite.
So those running shoes are down at the end of the day. Those are the ones you try and grab in the residence.
That's right, yeah. But because you're wearing dry pants every day, that even if they don't entirely dry out, it doesn't really matter, because your feet aren't going to get wet from them, but they are cold. And this is exactly where I'm going, so thank you. And I'll jump ahead to a quick story. So we get up to Great Bear Lake. It's essentially like walking into a refrigerator. All the hardwood trees are now gone. The birch trees that started to appear, they're all gone. The willows and aspens, they all disappeared too. And we're left with the spruce again. There's no more wildlife to see, and all the berries are gone too. There's no more cloudberries. or strawberries or blueberries. They're all gone. The blueberries are green still by the time we get up to Great Bear Lake. And on the morning of August 4th, we wake up and there's a hard frost over everything. There's ice in our water bottles, and my running shoes were so frozen that I had to warm them up by the fire just to get them on. That's what I was going through in the beginning of August while you were all down here melting. The Northwest Territories actually had their coldest, wettest summer in 35 years. So whatever you guys experienced down here, I experienced the total opposite.
Speaking of water, would you drink the water straight out of the river without treating it, or just straight up the water?
Yes, we did. So the two paramedics we had with us, they told us and swore by it that beaver fever has given beavers a very bad reputation and is actually caused or carried by humans. So if you're traveling through pristine environments where there's very little or no human impact, there's no chance of you getting beaver fever. So we filtered, like sometimes we would filter, but then eventually like you just stop. For the majority of the trip, I didn't filter any water and I didn't get sick. I wouldn't recommend that. I'm not here to argue with anybody whether or not that's true. That's what we do. Great question. But we did have a filter with us in case somebody did not feel comfortable. One of those fancy hanging ones, the gravity. Yeah, just great. Never have to pump it. Yeah.
Back to the river for a second. You were saying you were advised to go up river left, you went river right. What does the other side look
Oh yeah, that's what I was going to say. Thanks, Ian. So we're going up this thing here, right? And every time we come around a corner, like just like this one, we're thinking to ourselves, like, please don't let there be a cliff. Please don't let there be a cliff. Because if there's some kind of obstacle that we could not physically walk around, our only option was to turn around, go all the way back down the rapids, ferry across, and go up the other side. So we're just hoping and praying the whole time that there wasn't going to be an obstacle. What the other side of the river probably looked identical to this. I can't imagine it was any better. I would recommend people to take River Right next time. It worked.
Because that's what you did.
That's what we did, and it worked. There's not a lot of groups. We only found 2 other groups previous to us in modern times to go up the Great Bear River. So again, it's not super well traveled. There's really not a whole lot of information on it. But eventually, we get up to Great Bear Lake. So after 7 days, and by the time we get there, my hands are like super swollen. I can't close them. I'm waking up in the night, and they've closed themselves like this, and I have to pry them open because I got the claw. I haven't been that sore since I finished a tree planting contract when I was 28. So it was close to being the sorest that I've ever been in my entire life. And we get up to the top of the Great Bear River, close to Delaney there, and Eva's waiting for us. We roll into camp on the final day after 14 hours on the water. It's about 2 a.m. and we're totally exhausted. But we have it's like we have 2 kilometers left to go. We're in camp here? No way. We're getting to the end of this. We're finishing this today. So that's what we did. Eva's standing there on the shore. She had the fire going and tea going. We stayed up most of the night, just kind of exchanging stories and catching up. And luckily for us, for the 3 of us, it was really windy the next day, and we didn't have to feel too bad about mutinying on Eva and saying we're not going anywhere today. So we took our 3rd and final rest day of the trip at the top of the Great Bear River before starting out on the mammoth that is Great Bear Lake. So Great Bear Lake being the 7th biggest lake in the world, we were ultimately going to close to Conjurer Bay or Gun Barrel Inlet. So we had 375 kilometers to paddle along the south shore as fast as we possibly could because we didn't know when the weather was going to turn, and we really didn't want to be there because it's really not a fun or safe place to be. This turned out to be the most stressful part of the whole trip. Mainly because we were at the whim of the weather and we traveled whenever the wind let us travel. The water is extremely cold. We often found ourselves very far from shore, doing a lot of crossings. It was a lot of stress being built in the mind of constantly trying to get to the end. But you can't paddle 375 kilometers in a day. So you knew it was going to take some time, but constantly just wanting to be at the end and knowing that you were off of it. And also, the other thing is, too, there's only one town out here. It's Delaney. It's a small town, too, about 800 people. So the further east you go, the further and further you're getting from safety. The more and more out into the wilderness you truly are, and the further away from help you are. I put this little map on here to illustrate some of the big crossings that we had to contend with. We started off the first 80 kilometers or so. It's wide open. Like this would be 150 kilometers across, but you'd never be able to see the other side. Like, it's wide open ocean. And so we did all of these big crossings. We did every single one of these all the way across all of these ones. And then the big one that came to us, and again, we knew this was coming, we were not excited for it, is that we had to get from here over to this point up here. And we knew this crossing here is about 6 kilometers. Actually, there's an island in the middle here. So it was 6 kilometers and then another 5 kilometers, and then immediately another 6 kilometers to get up into here. So we knew that day we were going to spend most of it out at sea, and not very exciting at all. Well, extremely exciting, not very much fun. So things to keep in mind when you're doing really big crossings in a canoe is which way is the wind coming from. You'd much rather have a consistent, strong wind coming out of a certain direction than it being dead calm. Because when it's dead calm, the wind can pick up from any direction and really cause havoc. So keeping in mind where it's safe to fall back. So if you're coming across this portage here, you can always drop back down into this bay and find safety. But if the wind starts blowing this way, it might blow you out. So there's a lot of things that are on the mind when you start off on a really big bay crossing. It's always a really, really intense experience, and there's almost no talking that happens when you're out there. Everyone's paying really, really close attention to the wind, to the waves, to the clouds, to the birds, and you're paddling at like a marathon pace, like even 45 strokes a minute, for as long as it takes to get across. So sometimes it would take 2.5 hours to paddle across 6 kilometers because there'd be like actual swell out there. Like it was a wild thing. It was a wild thing to do, and I would not recommend anybody else to do this.
Great Bear Lake at 4:40 in the morning.
I don't think so. I think it would matter.
It's 4:40 in the morning.
It's Great Bear Lake at 4:40 in the morning. So our routine on this lake, it quickly became, we would get up at some ungodly hour. So to be on the water for 4:30, we'd get up at 3:30, like me or Eva, or the leader of the day. They would get up at 3 o'clock. They'd get out of the tent. They'd look around. They'd make a judgment call really quick, and they'd say yay or nay. And if they said yay, they woke everybody up. You'd light the fire. So all within an hour, you wake everybody up. You light the fire. You make the breakfast. You drink the coffee. You have the poop. You take down your gear. You pack the boats, and you're off. And it's but a bing, but a boom. You're out of there as fast as you possibly can. And so we would get on the water at say 4:30 in the morning. Paddle for a couple hours, go pee, paddle for a couple hours, have a snack, paddle for a couple hours, eat lunch, and then so on and so forth. Eventually you'd stop for dinner, then you'd paddle for a couple hours. You'd stop and set up camp, sleep for 3 or 4 hours, and then get up again at 3 o'clock in the morning and do it all over again. So we were paddling pretty much constantly with short little 3 or 4 hour breaks in between for the entire 11 days we were out there. And it was always the wind. So sometimes the wind would pick up while we were out there, and we wouldn't actually be able to get to shore. So you have to wait for the wind to calm down, or you would have to wait in order to find a safe cove to pull into. Other times you'd get to shore and the wind would pick up, and like, thank God we're not out there anymore. Yeah. So also, before I get into more of those funny stories from the trip, the fisheries on Great Bear Lake was one of the most incredible things that I've ever seen. And you can probably tell by now that I am a fisherman. It was Eric Ward, Wonder Boy's holy grail in life, and I'm pretty sure this is the only reason why I came, was to catch lake trout in Great Bear Lake. And that's exactly what we did. And once we got there, we were eating fresh lake trout every single day. And it was no problem to catch 30 or 40, 15-pound lake trout in a day. It was like shooting a barrel and fishing a barrel, like nonstop. We stopped at a Bain and Fishing Lodge somewhere along the way to wait out some wind, and I was reading the guest book in there, and it said, had a great week at the camp, caught 756 fish, 150 of them were over 30 pounds. All lake trout. So you can catch, there's 60, 70, 80-pound lake trout. And Eric Ward, being an avid fly fisherman, was catching them on flies. So we were throwing dry flies at 12, 15-pound lake trout and routinely catching them. And I probably became the first person in history to have their first fish they've ever caught on a fly rod be a lake trout, be a 15-pound lake trout.
Fly fishing for lake trout, Great Bear Lake, brought to you by Eric Ward.
This is just at a camp one day after dinner, going out, having some fun. I had a buddy lend me some GoPros while I was out there to capture all of these images. Brad, thank you very much. They did a very, very good job, and I was very happy to have them. These images like this, the water was crazy blue and clear. In the fishery, like this, I just never seen anything like it. You see lake trout jumping out of the water, schooling Cisco, and swarming up like you would see like dolphins in the ocean. Like it was a wild, wild experience to be able to catch that many trophy-sized fish. Great Bear Lake, like it was really such a big lake. There's really no images that I could take to really do it justice. This was on the east side of the lake where the Canadian Shield starts to come up. Some of the oldest rock in the world is exposed here. But you would get these storms as well. This is just luck, I happened to get that. But you would get these massive storms. And sometimes they would roll by out to sea or out in the lake and you'd see them go by. And then a little bit while later, it would go from calm like this and then the swell would pick up. And it would pick up and it would pick up. And the canoe next to you would disappear and then you'd be way up. And then they would, and you'd do this kind of like this dance routine. And the other canoe would completely disappear in the swell and then they would come back up. And all the swell, it was generated from the storms that were rolling by. So oftentimes in the night, it would go to bed, it was calm, and then you would hear these waves coming in, but it would still be calm. And you knew that another storm had rolled by. This storm here, we knew it was coming, and we knew it was coming directly at us. So we had time to pack up the best we could before it rolled in. And one of the coolest things that I have ever experienced, and I've had this happen a couple of times. You're sitting there, it's the calm before the storm, it's dead quiet, the bugs are really, really crazy, they're really bad, the humidity is really high, and then you hear this sound. Stop everyone. And you're like, yeah, what is that? And it sounds like a freight train. It's like a monster coming. And it's like, that's the sound of the rain coming across the lake. Do you think we have everything tied down properly? And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, well, we're about to find out. So what people do in survival situations is they fight, they flight, or they freeze. I'm taking video, so I guess I froze. Eric Ward, he freezes, but he saves the bread. Chris is running around like a maniac trying to tie down his tent. And Eva's up in this tree here trying to cut the knot on our bug tent. And this was the official last usage of our bug tent. And this storm, it just came in and hammered us. And for about 45 minutes, it was just flowing sideways. They just fired a bunker. Those things, I never used it in the But being caught out in the lake in a storm like this, it would be game over. It would be a bad situation for me. I can remember about halfway across the lake, I saw Eva one morning and I'm like, Eva, like we never really had a safety talk. What happens if like something happens? What happens if a boat tips? And she's from Czech Republic, so Eastern European, kind of blunt and dry. So she says in this very blunt voice, she goes, safety talk? There's no safety talk. You dump, you die. You won't dump. Oh, okay, thanks. Good safety talk. And she was essentially right though, because the water was so cold. None of us had dry suits, and that's more of just the gear that we had on the trip. But if you were to dump your canoe more than 500 meters from shore, there's not a whole lot that the other canoe could have done. They're fully loaded. They have 2 full barrels full of food, 2 full dry bags, plus all your daily stuff. Like you're not doing a T-rescue out there very effectively. Maybe they can grab onto your bow line and you can drag them to shore. But on some of these crossings, like we were kilometers from shore. Like we're way, way out there. Like, and you're thinking to yourself, like, wow, this is really scary stuff, man. It's like a tension that you hold inside of you, and as soon as you get to shore, it goes away, but you know the next bay crossing is coming. Yeah.
Are you getting weather forecasts over?
I was getting updated forecasts from a couple different sources coming into us daily on this machine here. But the problem with those is that the weather stations were so far away, they weren't super reliable. And the lake is so big that it would generate its own weather. Yeah, it's so big it would generate its own weather. So we come across here and we're going up Grizzly Bear Mountain now. This is Grizzly Bear Mountain here, and these are the Sweetgrass Hills. Together combined, it's the biggest National Historic Site in Canada, and at a cultural and historical value to the Saute Dene people. And wandering through here, like just behind our campsites, we found all kinds of amazing things, like old cabins, old trap lines. I found a trap once, like a foot snare trap that had been set, laying in place, rusted. It looked like it was rusted open until Chris picked it up and then it closed. Ooh, that's crazy. And then we even found a grave back there once too, and I didn't take any pictures out of it out of respect. But we didn't know where it was and told some people afterwards.
It's a good thing you ate that when she did. She would have survived that at all.
No, that's right. She made the right decision in the end to leave, because if she didn't like what she thought was stressful on the first part, she would have hated the second part. Now, the Great Bear River was significant, and then the stress of being on this lake. So when we got here to this major crossing here over to the Leaf Peninsula, we knew it was coming. So we get up really early, 2 o'clock in the morning. We get to the point closest to the island, and it's kind of foggy that day, and it's raining. The weather's really not really all that good, but the winds are favorable for us. And but we can't see the island that we're aiming for. And we have our compass bearings, and we're sitting there, and we're going over, and we're checking, and we're rechecking, and rechecking. I kind of stopped the group. I'm like, so you want me to paddle out into this lake to an island that we can't see, hoping that we'll hit it? And all three of them at the same time say, yes, right now. All right. So off we went. And we did. We got across. It was a small barren rock full. It was a bird nesting island, not hospitable to really stay on. So we caught our breaths there, and then there was a 6 kilometer crossing, and then we had another 5 kilometer crossing before doing another 6 kilometer crossing. So it was a really long day, really stressful. It was at this point too, because we woke up so early, we skipped breakfast to get on the water, to get to the place to do the crossing, that we kept doing these crossings. We kept going and going and going, and then the wind picked up, and we couldn't figure out exactly where we were on the map. We didn't have a GPS, but that was on purpose too. And it was actually, that was one of the days the group dynamics really came unglued. We pulled it together in the end, but we went from 2 o'clock in the morning till 2 o'clock in the afternoon without having eaten, without stopping for breaks, with no real hydration. So there's a real contradiction in the group, whether we need to stop right now and eat food, or do we keep going before the wind gets even worse? Because the stress is also building here. And our bodies are starting to fall apart on us a little bit. The hands start cracking. We tape them up the best they can, but you have to do it every single day. There's not enough moisturizer in the world to keep your hands from really cracking. And like, you're really, really tired at this point too, because we've been out on this, for Chris and I, we've been out on this trip for over 30 days now. We're going up to 35, 40 days. So the constant stress of moving ahead and being out in the elements is really starting to take its toll on the body, but also on the mind. So you would stop on the shoreline waiting for the for the wind to die. You'd sleep whenever you could. Anytime you had a chance to have a nap, you'd lay down and just have a nap. This is a great picture. This is about that time as well. You can see my lip is cracked. My eyes are swollen from lack of sleep. My cheeks are swollen from all the bug bites. I'm sunburnt everywhere. I think this was taken really early in the morning too, so I don't generally look super happy. But I think it really paints a picture as to how we were all feeling at this point in the trip. And we really, really just wanted to go off this thing. And so eventually we did. And we got down in a place called Gun Barrel Inlet, and we lined the boats up through this tiny little run, and we had officially finished Great Bear Lake, which felt really, really good for us. And taken us on to the Ida Trail. So the Ida Trail is the traditional waterway used by the Aboriginal people to move between Great Slave Lake and Great Bear Lake. So it uses the Marion Rivers and the Kamzo River. And we had full intention at the beginning of the trip to see this through and go all the way to Pachoco on Great Slave Lake. But as with most things in life, being flexible with your plans is very, very important. And our plans also changed as we went. As we got onto this section here, this section is very rarely traveled these days. We took the traditional route, so we veered away from the Kamzo River and took the lakes and portages to get us to a place called Hota Lake, which was another massive, massive lake, 120 kilometers long. And one oversight we made in planning this whole expedition is that once we got up to Great Bear Lake, those last 700-800 kilometers on the trip were mostly on these really, really big lakes. It became a really tedious process to move through them, trying to average 30 kilometers a day, paddling on really big lakes. It's 250 kilometers a week, and you just go, 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 go. It's like you come around a corner and the next, and you're like, no, yeah, all the way across this one, all the way across that one. So anybody who's planning to do on a long expedition in the north, I highly recommend you incorporate as many rivers as possible, because rivers help you out. But we got lost on this portage here for like 5 hours, and it's pouring rain on us, and we couldn't find the way through. Just looking at this going. But sometimes you find these old light cabins, right? So this is obviously from an old hunt. It would have been great to bring back one of these as a souvenir, but how do you move around a caribou? It's that big. It would have been great because I have a collection of dead things that I take into schools to show kids. So I think it's really important for kids to interact with nature, but often they can't, given the setting that they live in. So I'll just bring in things, so like moose antlers and deer horns, and add a caribou horn. Antler, sorry, would have been a really great thing to add to that. And kids love these things. They love dead things. They love touching skulls and like poop and like feathers and fur. And everybody does. Don't lie to them.
Those caribou, those elk.
Where's caribou? It's all caribou. So as we went along up the Kamzo River, which was really just a series of lakes, it started to become apparent to us that we were most likely not going to make it all the way to Great Slave Lake. And the reasons behind this were, well, it was different for everybody. So I can only speak for myself. Looking at the logistics of finishing off the trip, we knew that once we get to this town of Gameti, or Ray Lakes, it was still 270 kilometers to Great Slave Lake. It would have included 42 portages, and we only had 7 days to do it. So we talked about it for a little while as a group. We threw it back and forth. We tried our best to get to Ray as fast as we could, but about a week out, we had a big team meeting, and we settled on the idea like, hey, we have all this food. Let's eat it all now. And when we get to Ray, we'll just call the trip there. We don't owe anybody anything. We'll have gone 1,300 kilometers. It's been fantastic. There's no sponsors looking over us. It's like, we can do anything we want. And if you really want, you can come back to Ray one day and finish it up. It's not the end of the world. You do not have to feel bad about it. And for me, that was really hard because I always want to accomplish the goal that I had set out for. So then to pull it back a little bit and be content with what we had already accomplished, it took me a little while to work through that, but I'm absolutely okay with it. It was absolutely the right time to pull out. So we finished 7 days early in Ray, and we got to eat all that food in the last little bit of the trip, which was amazing. I managed to lose 16 pounds on this trip, and I'm not entirely sure why, because Eva stayed the same. All of her body fat turned into muscle. She stayed the same. And Chris and Eric, they both gained 2 pounds, most likely in muscle, but I lost 16, and I can't afford to lose 16 pounds. So there's some more investigation that I need to do before I go out on the next big trip as to why those happened. There's a lot of carbohydrates being eaten, a lot of pasta, a lot of bread. I don't know. I haven't had any issues since I got back. I've been eating regularly, and I gained all the weight back. So I really don't know what it was. I have a feeling it was a lot of mental stress and things I was working through at the time. And it just, I don't know.
The caregiver wasn't here.
That's carrying everybody else's gear. There were really big fish back here as well. So this is about a 30-pound northern pike. Eric caught this fish on 5 of diamonds, but he was catching fish like this on fly gear as well. So this is trophy fish. This would have been 4 or 5 feet long, but there's no shortage of these fish in the lakes around us. Yeah, it's crazy to believe, eh? So we actually ended up eating this fish, and it too was delicious. It gave us a lot of meat, that's for sure. It's a rare selfie or shot of the photographer in Eva's beautiful eyes. And as we went along, the beauty of the landscape never ceased. Like, it was all the way across. It was untouched, pure virgin, abundant wilderness as we traveled up the Kamsel River. And the weather did start to deteriorate on us as we went. But we did eventually make it to Ray. Again, 7 days before our scheduled finish, but we still managed to eke out 51 days on trip and 1,300 kilometers before hopping on the plane and flying back to Yellowknife. So as I said at the beginning of this is such a diverse trip with so many landscapes going down 3 rivers and up 2 and across Great Bear Lake. There's no I have over 2,000 pictures and hours and hours and hours of videos that I'm still trying to sort through. There's no possible way that I could pull out all the best images and tell you in detail the story of the whole trip tonight. But I hope that I have done a good job at briefing you on the fabulous adventure that we had this summer. I also want to wrap up by saying that this type of big adventure is not for everybody. But that being said, it's probably for a lot of you, and if you haven't tried it yet, I would recommend it that you try, because it's really important to do things that make you feel uncomfortable, because in order to feel the triumphs and like the peaks of life, you have to feel the downs and the slumps as well. So you can think about that mentally and emotionally if you like, but it's also like you have to be uncomfortable. Like, it's gonna snow tomorrow, people, and it's gonna be awesome, but you're gonna get cold. But you have to get cold in order to enjoy it. Like, you have to be there when it's pouring rain and you're running low on food, or a ground blizzard blows in, or you have to experience those really, really hard things in order to feel the triumph at the end. They go hand in hand. So if you're one of those people that want to go out and do a trip like this, I urge you to do that, but you have to do it with pure intentions. You have to really, really want to be there. So you can't be doing it for fame. You can't be doing it for sponsorship. You can't be doing it for glory, because when times get really, really hard and you're paddling across Great Bear Lake and a big wave crashes over the top of your canoe and you're thinking to yourself, like, oh, shit, we're done. You still have to be there. You have to be there in that moment when the bugs are driving you crazy, or thunderstorms rolling in, or it's a blizzard, because if you do not want to be there, that's when it falls apart. That's when people quit and go home. That's when they say, well, this isn't worth it. This is crazy. But if you do purely, genuinely want to be there, and this is something that has become part of you, then you need to want to be there even when times are really hard. And once you've gone out and you've done something like this, it intrinsically changes who you are. It becomes part of you, deep within your marrow, deep within your bones, and you'll return a different person, and you'll never be the same. And trust me, this is quite addictive. Once you've started, there's no going back. And it's all about living the best life that we possibly can. So looking forwards, I'm currently working with my friend Dan again. We're planning a 2-week, 100-kilometer traverse of Mount Gru. It's a mountain range. We're going to do it in March. It's a ski traverse of a mountain range east of the Manicouagan Reservoir, north of the St. Lawrence. It's not on most people's radars, which is the exact reason why I want to go there. So I'm looking forward to that in March. And then looking forward to next summer, Noah Booth and I, Noah, say hi. We're looking into the options of paddling a new route across Labrador from Schefferville. It will require 2 heights of land portages, maybe 600-700 kilometers of paddling. We're looking at 2 different options right now, but like, the dreams are out there, and often these trips, they take years or decades to really come to fruition. So keep having those dreams, keep thinking about them in the back of your mind, you never know when you're going to find somebody else who wants to do them with you, or maybe you just go do them yourselves. But keep having those dreams, please. We'll be back on Thursday, December 6th at 8 p.m. for Joel Hornberg. If any of you, I'm always looking for other presenters, because generally people who are passionate enough to do something like this are also passionate enough to share your stories. And I'm positive that all these people here want to hear your stories as well. Come talk to me, send me an email, whatever it is. I will make space for you to share your passion. There's also one event happening tomorrow night out at East Dover by Glenn Colton. He's going to be presenting on.
Yeah, my wife and my 11-year-old daughter this summer biked from our home in East Dover down to New York City. So we will trip over about 5.5 weeks. And yeah, so we're talking about that tomorrow night in East Dover at 7 o'clock. Because we'll fly triathlon there. So East Dover Community Center. Community East Dover, hang on the left at the park, and the community center right up on the right.
So it's going to be another great talk, and like really simple thing to go do, and he did it with his kids and his family. Like, how cool is that? So don't let your life circumstances stop you from doing the things you want.
I got a couple questions if as remote as Wilderness Trip was, did you come across any garbage or plastic or anything wilderness? If you did, what did you do?
Great question. So very little, very little. So one of the things that I absolutely love the most of traveling through these environments is that they're still pristine in many senses. You still see the planes and the contrails in the sky. But as far as seeing signs of other human beings, you almost never see anything. Whereas when you walk the coastlines anywhere in the world, we all know the story, you see garbage everywhere you go. But you can still find these pristine environments all over the northern parts of the world, in Canada, especially. So no, we didn't see a whole lot. Every once in a while, we'd find an old tin can or an old hunt can. They were really food focused.
And the other question is, I noticed you had both plastic paddles and wooden paddles. Yeah, and I was just wondering how much you had of each and how you chose what to use.
Right, so we used, we had the aluminum paddles for the whitewater, beating off the rocks and whatnot. We used, I'm actually a convert after this trip. I went out and bought one of those bench shaft paddles. They're really light and short, apparently more efficient. I don't know. But they work really well. They're light and they're short, and you can take a lot of strokes really fast with them. All four of us, used bench shaft paddles for all these big lake crossings.
And in your final shots, you were going across Great Bear Lake, it looked like you'd saved your polling boats.
Yeah, we did. We had a hard time letting them go. We became really attached to them at this point. We polished them with our hands. They were like these works of art. We're like, what do we? And eventually, we just hopped them back into the river. Yeah. Eventually, we let them go, but it was hard to do. Yeah.
Dave, I'm wondering on the large 4-kilometer portage you did, what was your method? Did you do the halfway portage back, or did you do the full portage with the rocket back?
Yeah, we did it in stages. Yeah, so we moved everything forward, say halfway, and then went back, grabbed it, and then went forwards. So we leapfrogged.
Yeah.
We got everything to the halfway point where we camped the first night, and then the next morning, Chris and I, we just took as much as we could possibly carry in one go, and we left that campsite and walked all the way to the Keel River. We just kind of blazed a path, and then we went back to show everybody the way we were taken. Was it the right way? I don't know.
Did you think about any grizzly preparation?
We did. We had bear spray. We had bangers. We only saw one grizzly bear, and I think Eve and I were the only ones to see it. We were in the canoe. It was a good bear. Stood up on its legs, looked at us, and then turned around and ran away. But we did lots of sign, lots and lots of sign. We saw some massive prints, and you knew they were around. The big boys were lurking around, but we didn't actually see any. And we only saw a couple of black bears. We had a black bear on a campsite on Great Bear Lake, but he didn't seem to mind us too much. Just kind of sniffed around and hung out. Yeah, we didn't have any animal problems at all, actually. No, there's no worries. I'm just because I know I'm just gonna end it there. If you guys want to come chat privately, you can ask questions or mingle or meet each other, but we're just gonna wrap it up here. that's okay with everybody. If you have any more questions, feel free to come ask me. If you want to hang out and help me put away some chairs, that'd be sweet. If not, have a really great night and I'll see you in 3 weeks.